It's Neale Petersen, founder, publisher of Real Estate Investor magazine. I'm sitting here with Dolf de Roos. Dolf, we go back quite a few years. It's more than a decade. Started off in New Zealand, and really I think one of the things that I liked about your work was the psychology of real estate. Now, we're here on the roadshow in South Africa. You've been here a number of times, but I think this time around we take it up a level each time. First thing is, we're going to Skari. We've got an investor forum over there, and I think we're also passionate about training real estate agents as well. Let's talk a little bit about sort of opportunities in real estate. First of all, here in South Africa, why you're here, just in sort of general, and the things that we are doing and looking at doing. And so maybe let's talk a little bit about that first.
Well, there are always opportunities, as you well know, Neale, in real estate. The thing that happens when you get a bit older, when you get a few more grey hairs, and I think we both qualify under that moniker, is that you realize that there are now people investing in real estate who, when we were doing deals a couple of decades ago, they hadn't been born, or they might have been in kindergarten or something. And we hear stories like even last night at the magazine award, the gala dinner, we heard stories from young people who were doing deals today that weren't around when we were doing deals, and they probably didn't learn from us, some of them might have, but there are deals all the time in a manner that I cannot see being replicated in other investment arenas. I don't come across young people that have done well in gold or silver or platinum or emu farms or all those schemes that we've heard about over the years that people should get into. But real estate stays pretty consistent. And one of the measures of that is when you read a book that was written last year by some new real estate guru, or you read a book written 50 years ago by someone. I'm thinking of guys like Hicks, who wrote a book, How I Made $1 Million in Real Estate. Apart from the language that is adapted a bit to suit the times, they're almost identical stories. It doesn't change. You could almost say real estate is extraordinarily boring because it doesn't change. Whereas the fashion industry changes and the technology industry changes. You know, I grew up on Walkman, which... yeah, even you had to laugh. They were cassette players where they were portable and you put them in. And when they came out with an auto reverse Walkman, that was like, oh my gosh, I want one of those. I don't have to take it out and flip it around. And then when CDs came along, there was no more wow and flutter and there was no background noise. But even they got replaced by MP3 players, you know, and even they've gone now. We've got so it's all changing. So if you'd come up with an invention or some way of making money with cassette tape technology or fax machine technology. I worked for years on an encryption system for fax machines. Neale, it was brilliant. No one buys it now. No one pays me 1 cent from that brilliant invention because no one uses a fax machine anymore.
Yeah.
Whereas if you'd bought a property back then, it would still be generating rental income for you. So that's sort of this revelation for me that it just keeps on going.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, we all have to live somewhere. We send our kids to school somewhere. We go to universities. We buy our gas or petrol at a petrol station. It's all real estate that someone leases and someone owns. So I love it for that reason.
In South Africa, we see a lot of technology which is impacting on real estate. But I don't think it's going to impact on real estate per se, as you said, because it always grows, and there's going to be capital growth, it's going to be rental income and that kind of stuff. And you know, coupled with that, there's the shiny objects like the cryptocurrencies. You know, everybody loves it and say, well, I made millions, but nobody really understands how it actually works. You know, there's blockchain, you know, that's in the background. So just in terms of the future of real estate, what are your views in the future? You said not much has changed in terms of the investment returns, but what kind of impact do you think technology? Now, let's use some examples which have already happened. There's an American site called Knock in South Africa. We've also got a site called House Me, which is a 2.5% on your rental income, and which everything is done online. And we have obviously private property, which is an innovator. Obviously in this particular sector, listings, that kind of, and there's a lot of new estate agents coming in at very low. But just give us your perspective. Those are the few things that are happening. maybe let's roll on 10 years. What kind of impact do you think technology will have?
Well, it's
on
having
real
a
estate?
big impact, Neale, and I
Yeah.
don't even know what you're talking about. Housing or something, you said 2.5%. I'm not sure if it's a management company.
Property management.
And they
It is
charge
property.
2.5%.
That's correct.
But it doesn't
Yeah.
matter. You've got to adapt to these new technologies. It's happening. I mean, look at the Airbnb phenomenon. 10
Yeah.
years ago, we'd barely heard of it.
Yeah.
It might have only been 8 years ago that it started.
Yeah.
But it's happening. So now you get ways of unlocking doors remotely. So if you have an Airbnb, instead of having to be there to greet your guests for a 1-night stay or a 10-night stay or whatever, you can now punch in a code where you give them the code by SMS message, and then they arrive there and they can punch in that code and they can unlock the door. You have to adapt to that sort of technology. But the fundamentals of people renting space, be it for 1 night or 1 month, to live in or to work in or to have an office, be it an office for an afternoon at a Regis style, what do you call it, one of those office facilities,
That's
or whether
right.
you have a
Yeah.
5-year lease, that fundamental won't change. But absolutely, stay up to date. You know, I have someone who was big in real estate, much bigger than I was, and he shunned computers because he said they're just a waste of time. People play games and they're fixing the impact of virus infections and all that. Well, some of that is true, but they've also taken it. So you've got to stay up with the play.
Yeah.
But it's still going to be real estate for the foreseeable future.
Yeah.
Now, there are some changes because
Yeah.
millennials, for instance, they are shunning car ownership. I know many millennials who don't even have a driver's license, and their theory is we don't need one because we don't own a car. We never want to own a car. We'll do the ownership. We use Uber and Lyft and Zip. That's one where you use a credit card and some app on your phone to get access to a car. You hire it for an hour and then you leave it again.
Right.
So millennials aren't buying as many properties. And I've heard that as an argument to say, you better watch out, Dolf, the market's disappearing. No, folks, when they aren't buying properties, that means they're renting because they're living somewhere.
Yeah. Last night at the Investor of the Year Awards, you were the keynote speaker, and then, of course, we were also on the judging panel. And I think we saw a lot of creativity in terms of some
It was
of the deals.
phenomenal, yeah.
And the winner, who was Robin Booth, in fact, came out with a whole rent-to-rent concept where he actually rented somebody else's property, and then obviously he repurposed it with a profit. And so just the kind of creativity that's coming out. You talk about the millennials. So just your thoughts on creativity, because I think that's one of your specialities, property with a twist, and incorporating what we heard last night.
Right. Well, that is what I love about real estate. You are limited only by your creativity. You know, what you can dream up in your mind, that's what you can do. So you can do things to a building to change its functionality or its use or its usefulness by spending, you know, maybe 10,000 Rand, but the value, the perceived value to an owner goes up by 100,000, and the number can be a lot bigger. I've told the story of how we turned $20 into $2 million overnight. And that sounds like a fantastic claim, but we used the $20 to paint a white circle and the letter H on the roof of a commercial building, and now it had helipad access, and the rental went up by 200,000 a year, and you cap that out by 10%, and there's your 2 million lift. These things are possible. And if you're watching this and saying, unlikely story, then you're limited by your belief system, which is, well, I didn't think of it, so why should it work if someone else thinks of it? Instead of saying you can't do that, you should start to think, how can I do that? Can I adapt that? In fact, as you probably know, one of my books has got the longest title on Amazon. It's called 101 Ways to Massively Increase the Value of Your Real Estate Without Spending Much Money. And it's full of ideas like that, where you can do crazy things that still make sense. I mean, you read and say, well, I could have thought of that. Well, I could have thought of that one too. But most people don't. So my challenge is, if you own a property, read through this book and see how many of those 101 ideas you can apply to your property to increase its value. And by the way, I know I'm talking a lot, but I have a question. Do you think it was easy to come up with 101 ways? And the answer is, it was tough. It was tough to limit it to 101 because there are so many more. Just let your imagination run rife. It's like being a kid again. We are constrained as adults. We have to think this way. We have to act a certain way. We can't be goofy. We can't be silly. It's not the way it's done. That happened when we were little. Well, this way you can be as goofy as you like. Come up with a crazy idea.
Dolf, the psychology of real estate is certainly one of your signatures in terms of getting people to rethink about how they think about whether they're in business, whether they're in real estate, or whether they're an investor. Share a little bit about that, because you know you're also very passionate about training real estate agents, and we've got the Double Your Sales program, and so maybe just talk a little bit about that, incorporating that the psychology of real estate.
What spurred this on, what Neale's talking about, is I did a survey at one stage. I ran a survey to find out how many of my students made $1 million within 18 months. And so we sent out the survey to, I think, 7,000 participants. And we collated all the replies. And I was pretty optimistic that we would have done all right. And I was devastated by the results because it was fewer than 4%. And in my mind, that wasn't even statistically significant. Meaning if you take 7,000 people at random, 4% are going to become millionaires anyway. They'll marry into money. They'll win the lottery. They'll take their family fortune of 10 million and only spend 9 million of it. But anyway, they'll end up with $1 million anyway. So I thought, what am I doing wrong? Is it the content? Is it my accent? Is it the speed of delivery? So I decided to stop everything I did, which I did for 11 months to figure this out. And I read over 200 books. I interviewed a lot of people. And I cracked this nut that it has nothing to do with the information that we process. It's not a left brain thing. It has everything to do with our psychology, our subconscious thinking. What's going on in our mind. And if you've been told often enough as a kid that money doesn't grow on trees and money can't buy your happiness and money is the root of all evil and all these things that we hear over, if you hear them 100, 200, 300 times, you start to believe that. And that's why in the West, including South Africa, when people win the lottery, they don't win 10,000 rand, they might win 20 million rand or whatever. And yet, within 5 years of winning the lottery, 80% of them financially are back to where they were before. Why is that? So I started developing a course where we counter this, where we kind of take the subconscious mind with all its hokey information, and we wipe the slate clean. And it's a very easy and gentle and fun process. It's actually liberating. And then we replace it with a more empowering belief. And the funny thing about the subconscious mind is you don't even have to believe it. Just like when you were a kid, you didn't believe money was the root of all evil. You probably saw that money was used to buy groceries. But when you indoctrinate yourself, you believe. So we replace it with a more beneficial belief, like my poverty helps no one, but my wealth can help a lot of people. That's sort of giving yourself permission to be wealthy. And we've got 1,000 more like that. And anyway, when we ran this sort of information through people in our real estate courses, the success rate went from under 4% to over 80%. And it's significant. So I'm very passionate about this. Given the opportunity, Neale, if I had an agent for a day and I could train them for a day, I would spend 90% of that time on psychology and only 10% on facts and the mechanics of how to do a deal.
And all the skills, which tends to be a big focus point.
Now, the reason I don't do that is because if I were to spend 90%, halfway through the day, they'd say, I came here to learn about real estate, not this stuff about subconscious mind, even though we know that that's going to help them. So it's a challenge for me, but we now blend it. And like this event you talk about at Askari Lodge, we're going to be touching on a lot of aspects of the psychology of creating wealth, because that's what will double your income faster than knowing how to fill out a form better or faster or with a different color pen or whatever. That's just mechanics. You've not only got to get into the subconscious of your own mind, which is really critical, but you've also got to understand the psychology of your client's mind. And when you can understand that, then the sky's the limit.
You used a great analogy last night at the Investor of the Year Award. And you were using the example of when you used to take photographs and how you applied using those particular skills that you had learned to actually taking a gun and actually shooting an animal. Just share a little bit, because it's a bit of a mindset sort of thing, and it'd probably be a skill thing.
Okay, well,
I'll put you on a bit of a spot.
No, I don't mind that. It's just how do you compress that into a short time.
Okay.
But it's true. I've done photography for a long time. I got my first camera at 4. I financed my way through university by taking photos for magazines, for American Express and Diners Club and Air New Zealand at the time, and New Zealand's biggest fashion magazine at the time. So, you know, during the day I'd be studying electrical engineering, but on the weekends I'd be out taking photo shoots of some wedding party or whatever. But what the net outcome was is that for years I knew how to hold a camera very steady and how to compose the shot. And when you take the photo, you gently nudge the shutter release so that it just triggers it. And I'd wait between breaths so that I wouldn't get the shake of the breathing. So I'd capture then, and I could also sense my heartbeat, and I'd shoot between heartbeats so that the camera was dead steady and just nudge it. And then I've never been a keen hunter or gun person or whatever, but one day a friend of mine said, hey, do you want to shoot a gun? And I said, okay. And it was a handgun that had 7 rounds in it, and he'd put 6 wooden bottles up on this fence and said, see if you can knock one of those down. And somewhat foolishly, it was a bit of a smart aleck remark because I had no basis for saying it, but it was mathematics for me. I said, what do I do with the spare bullet? You know, and he said, yeah, right. Well, when I picked up the gun, it was about the first time I'd ever held a gun. To me, it was like a camera. I used the sights as my viewfinder, and I composed my picture, right? I lined up the target. The crosshairs on the side were pretty small compared with this massive big wooden bottle, and I waited for between breaths and between heartbeats, and I nudged that trigger so that it just triggered without shake, and I hit the button. I just went boom, 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 boom. And I turned to my friend again and said, as I said, what do I do with the 7th bullet? And the whole point of the story is not that I'm a good shot at it, but I am. But I think it's because the skills I developed over decades in taking photos actually helped me unexpectedly and without intent in shooting a gun. And there are other stories I don't have time to tell, but the bottom line is if there's a battle going on, you want me on your side, you know? And it's all because of photography.
Which I think you're also saying that some of the skills that you learn, which is not related to the job, you could actually apply in your day-to-day job.
Yes, and that was the point of raising it. That
yeah.
You might have done things in your past that you think, well, that's totally irrelevant. For heaven's sake, I spent 8 years at university getting a PhD in electrical engineering, right? Not the easiest topic around. And people, even my parents said, well, what a waste, or haven't you wasted 8 years of your life? Well, no, because I didn't just learn things, facts and figures about engineering. I spent 8 years figuring out creative ways of solving problems. And real estate is just a problem. You know, there's a vacant building there. What do we need to do with it, or do to it, to make it an appealing proposition for tenants so that they're fighting over who gets there? Because right now it's vacant. And you'd be surprised how little you might have to do. Sometimes it's just a perceptual thing. Sometimes painting a building a different color and getting rid of the weeds and putting in double glazed windows for a total cost of, I don't know, $20,000. What's that, 300,000 Rand, is it? And suddenly you've got a tenant willing to pay you $40,000 a year. It's a good trade-off.
Yeah.
So it's thinking outside of the box. It's looking at things in a different light.
Okay. So in finality, in closing, parting shots. I mean, you've been here a few days in South Africa. We've met many people, lots of discussions, and you've got a kind of a sentiment of the market. And dare I say it, you know, there's a big overhang in South Africa right now, and I swear I wasn't going to talk about it, but it's land expropriation without compensation. And it scares the heck out of a lot of people. For other people, it's a massive opportunity. We saw both sides of that opportunity. How can we get, whether you're an agent, whether you're an investor, how can we get people to take that mental shift? And I know you've touched on some of it in terms of your psychology analogy, because some people let that one thing hold them back. And in fact, it holds back investors, holds back sales, holds back a whole lot of things. And actually, it could be a massive, massive opportunity that could unlock here in South Africa. What are your thoughts on that? Because you've kind of heard both views from people that actually own land and that kind of stuff. Any thought? But more importantly, the thoughts to break away from that focus, deterring you from doing what you're supposed to do, whether it is to double your sales or to grow your business.
Right. Well, the first thing I'll say is I'm pretty apolitical. I've never belonged to a political party, and I don't want to get into a political debate, let alone be in trouble with anyone.
Yeah.
But let me give some analogies, and then we'll come back to that. So New Zealand has the almost unique distinction in the world of being the only Western nation that does not have a capital gains tax. And over the decades, there have been talk by successive governments that they want to introduce that. Not because they want to punish their own people who voted them in, but because they want more money that they can spend on frivolous things that they later on may have to justify. So there's been talk of introducing a capital gains tax. I can't count the number of people that have said, Dolf, I'm going to wait till I find out whether they're going to introduce a capital gains tax, because that changes the equation. Folks, it doesn't. It only matters if you sell a property. One of my 8 golden rules is never sell anyway. So people use it as an excuse not to do something. And, you know, you go back in years, 50 years or 100 years, people were buying and selling properties. They're doing it today. They'll do it in another 50 years' time. For people who retire, almost without exception, their biggest asset is not their car that they thought was going to go up in value or a collection of butterflies. No, it's their house. And you'll hear them lament, if only we'd bought a second one. That's despite the introduction or otherwise of capital gains tax, whether interest rates would go from fixed to floating, all these other political decisions that are talked about that people use subconsciously as an excuse to justify not having to take a risk. That's why I say, be willing to take risks. I am where I am today, Neale, because I've been willing to take risks. All right. I don't want to get too much into this expropriation things. It remains to be seen whether it will be introduced or whether it's just a political football that's being
just
used.
a view from it probably will be introduced. What I'm really saying, it could be actually a massive opportunity. Although the perception is it's not an opportunity right now where it'll affect private property ownership. My feeling is that it's put a bit of a lull in the market, but I think we probably hit bottom, and if you jump into the market right now, it could be a massive, massive opportunity that could take off.
As I understand it, it's not as if one person's land will be taken away in its entirety. It's where a portion has to be apportioned to people living there. So that's going to expand the number of property owners. More people are going to understand property ownership. There's going to be trading. And in that sense, it could indeed be a massive boost. Here's something else that I think is going to happen. I mean, a lot of people know about South Africa, but not everyone. I mean, in America, only 17% of the population has a passport. When the world finds out how good the food is here, how open the spaces are here, how good the weather is here in this part of the world in the wintertime, and you're going to get masses coming here. They're going to need hotels, they're going to need safari lodges to stay in. The infrastructure is going to improve. It's going to employ masses. It's going to be a game changer, and that's going to impact real estate in a massive way. And it will counter any other slight wobbles in the market that there are.
And you saw in Johannesburg the number of cranes that are around there. I mean, it's
the biggest indicator, you're right, of whether an economy is going so right is the number of cranes on the horizon. In Sandton alone.
Yes.
And was it Fairways or Fourways?
Fourways.
Fourways. Oh, cranes everywhere.
Yeah.
And then Stain City, you know, multiple cranes.
Yeah.
It's happening. So I've got a feeling that South Africa's gone through a rough patch, and it's coming out of that.
Yeah. Parting shots, Dolf. We're on this roadshow. Parting shots, just in terms of your general sort of thoughts on the way forward and on real estate, and I think more importantly to the audience out there, because you know they're asking now where to. Maybe I'm a little bit stuck. Where to next? How can I? I know you've addressed a lot of those points. Just parting shots.
Neale, I think the biggest mistake is not to do anything. A lot of people think that they're going to defer making a decision until there's more certainty. But let me tell you this, not making a decision is of itself a decision. You've got to tell yourself every morning, either I'm going to decide to do nothing today, or I'm going to decide to do something. And you're better off deciding to do something, even with the benefit of future hindsight. It turns out to have been a mistake, and you learn from that mistake, and you correct, and you make a better decision next time, even if it's another mistake, than if you don't ever make a mistake because you've never tried anything. I am where I am today because I've been willing to make a lot of mistakes, and I've made plenty, I can tell you that. But I've learned from them. What doesn't break you makes you stronger. The world breaks everyone, and afterwards some people are strong in the broken places. I mean, we can go on and on. Just do something. The worst thing you can do is get home and turn your TV on.
Dolf, it's always wonderful chatting to you. I think you've given some great insight. Wonderful. Nice
Thank
to
you.
chat
Pleasure
to you
as always.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes,
Thank you.
thank you.